afternoon, everyone. We are 100 Years Enterprise. We welcome you into our world of the things that we go through in life. My name is Fahim, aka Lejon, and who I have to my right.
I'm Dante, aka Rakeem.
I'm Patrick, aka Hamza.
And again, we coming to you. And with this next topic, it's important that we understand what is guilt, what is shame, what is regret, what is remorse. Oftentimes, we feel those things, which are feelings and emotions, but can't really identify why and where they come from. Everything has a causative factor, well as a contributor factor. Something that's being caused and contributing to those things that we feel it. And my good brother Patrick, this is one of his topics. He will tell you why he chose it and why.
Why I chose it is because in my younger years, right, that led me to my crime, my life of crime, right, and ended up being incarcerated for a long period of time, and actually ended up us named 100 years based on our experience. Mm-hmm. Those are the four things that you pointed out that affected us, that impact us, right? And so when one would ask me, taking responsibility for something, right, I had to understand my guilt in the thing, right? I had to understand the difference between guilt, remorse, shame, and regret. And so when I went to the board and everything, they was had my life on the line to dictate whether I'm actually pro-social enough to be released from a situation. These are the kind of questions they asked me. And at times, I couldn't answer them.
Yeah.
I didn't know the difference. So they say, if you don't know the difference, then you don't know why you did what you did. And you can't be remorseful, you can't make amends if you don't understand, your sense of guilt or shame. You know what I mean? Because you may be carrying out a thing being shameful. And for example, I just used one of them. My guilt, right? When I was incarcerated and being in a situation where I was an aiding and abetting to a murder, second-degree murder, 2 attempts, right? And I ended up doing 31 years incarcerated. But for close to 15, 20 years, I was in denial.
Yeah.
About my guilty association, right? Yeah, I didn't actually committed the murder, but I had a gun and I went down there with the purpose of harming somebody. Even though I didn't kill that person directly, but my actions led me into a long time incarceration, and I had to admit guilt and say, you know what? If I wouldn't have no business being down there, being in the car with those individuals, whether it was my best friends or whatnot, I was going down there to do a negative act and impacted that community in regards to taking someone else's life. I had to admit that. I had to really feel that I was guilty. Like, that's guilt. I wasn't trying to feel that. I wasn't trying to acknowledge the fact that, you did some things that you were supposed to do. You put yourself in a situation and, that harmed somebody. You was part of something that harmed somebody. And that was the guilt that I didn't want to carry, So that's just one aspect of it. But I think this topic is good to talk about and share, because whenever we talking to young people and when we talk about what we do as an organization, as well as an agency to reach out to young kids and whatnot, as well as young adults, and then men and women that's our age, right? We must be able to impart these things on them so they can say we worked through it, and this is how we got through it to help you get through it. And that's the key why I talk about this.
Well, it's like you have the good, the bad, and the ugly of this. And when we tie this to the criminal street life, to the addictive street life, and we take it back to the kids, to the youth, and in order to understand them, we have to constantly look inside ourselves. We do the introspection, right? So we got to go deep within and say, how can we help these kids? How can we help the youth? How can we impart our education, our knowledge, our newfound discipline, and learn on the kids, right? And so when we talking to the teenagers, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old, whose mind hasn't fully developed. When you talking guns, when you're in a drug life, whether you're breaking windows in the cars, whether you're robbing, stealing, whatever act you are committing, oftentimes we don't understand the hurt what we cause on people, right? And if you can't understand the hurt and the impact what you cause on other people, then we can't really understand the remorse when it's time to have remorse, right? So we can get taken off the streets, put the handcuffs on, get some time, but still go through the necessary stages of recovery. What I mean by necessary stages of recovery is to find out who your true self is. But in order to go deep and to find out who your true self is, which I had to do, I had to understand remorse, right? And then to understand, to have a deep regret for a wrong committed. So if we commit a wrong act but not consider that act wrong, then I can't have remorse. I can't have regret. I can't even have shame because I don't understand what that wrong act is, right? And I think that's what we have to be able to do is to let society know, those who look up to us, those we convey a message to, why it's important to feel guilty. Because as you said, you're going through a process, you wouldn't feel guilty because you didn't understand it and because we didn't feel that we were directly culpable of the things said crime, right? So why would I feel guilty? And there's another trait I want to add with that. We would have the arrogance and the arrogance and the what's the other word?
The arrogance.
Arrogance, the ego. We had the ego. So because the ego will drive those things. That's the drive. That's the driving force behind the guilt, the shame, the remorse, the regret. The ego. Because if we had that male ego, it could become so powerful and knock those things out the way. You won't even think about regret. You won't think about shame. You won't think about remorse, right? Well, it's guilt. And I think, in my opinion, we have to be able to understand those things so we can impart on the youth of why it's important. And it's not a bad thing. It'll make you soft to be ashamed of a wrong act. To be have a strong regard of hurt when you commit a violent, heinous act on someone who didn't deserve it. The pain what it's bringing to the families and the victims, right? And we always enforce that to give back, through our actions for our wrongdoings. In order to do that, we have to have the guilt, right? We have to understand that shame, the regret. But most of all, we have to be remorseful because that remorse is going to come off not so much of what we say, but what this 1 in 100 years, but what we do to steer you from making early death decisions. And that's what we do.
Yeah. I'm reflecting back on my life, growing up as a kid, as a teenager, as a wild youngster. Okay. Understanding words. Can't read. What is remorse? What is regret? What is shame?
Remorse, a deep regret for a wrong committed. To have a deep regret for committing the wrong act or what you feel is wrong.
I committed a crime. They said you was guilty. In my mind, I wasn't guilty. In my mind, I wasn't guilty. Because I felt I was justified in committing that crime.
And you didn't feel bad about that wrong action.
And didn't feel bad about it. And I'm just share a real quick story. When I was sent to YA, we was both sent to YA to be evaluated to see if they're going to accept us in YA, to see if we can get treatment in YA. And the caseworker said, Mr. Gaines, if you can do this all over again, what would you do? In my mind, thinking, I told her I would do the same exact thing that I did. And she looked at me like I was like, wow.
Because you know what? The shame didn't kick in. You didn't have no shame.
So, being that one didn't understand any of that, I wasn't doing nothing wrong. But it took me to commit that crime. It took me to go to prison. It took me to understand people that was coming in for these self-help groups, it took me for them to come and explain to me and share their stories for it to really sink in and kick in. And then once it did, I was out of pocket for doing what I did. Now I can understand what remorse is. Now I can understand what guilt. I was guilty. Now I understand that. But back then, I didn't understand that.
Is it safe to say that those 4 things, guilt, shame, remorse, and regret, saved your life?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. Now I have a different understanding. Now I have a compassionate heart. Now I understand how, when I committed that crime, how it affected the families, the community, our families, as well as myself.
Absolutely.
But I didn't have no deep understanding about that. Because if I didn't understand what I was doing, if I thought what I was doing was right, then how can I understand any of them subjects? Couldn't understand it. You know, so that's why it's important for us to elaborate on that and to share our experience and share how did we feel on that side and how we feel now and how we got to where we at now. Because I'm quite sure we didn't feel none of that.
None of it.
We didn't feel shame. We didn't feel remorse. We didn't feel guilty. We didn't have regrets. I did that.
We didn't care.
Exactly.
And how can someone care? How can someone feel them things if you don't know yourself?
If you don't know yourself.
This is so powerful, right, in regards to what you said, and just in our life.
Yeah.
But just stick with us for a minute, right? Because look at the body work we're doing now.
Yeah.
We're the total opposite of what we said we were before. Image failed, identity denied,
Yeah.
right? We've come to realize that that identity that we was once a part of and saying being strong, being hard, failed us, right? We was broken. And come to understand that these 4 points right here, right? Guilt, shame, regret, and remorse, right? Is very important to humanity,
Yeah.
right? And we was acting outside of humanity. So what? We come together and formulate 100 years through our experience, right? We go out, right? We mentor kids. We go out, man, we do public speaking and also meet and greets to help them understand what the conditions of what we did.
Absolutely.
Right? Because no teacher, or should I say, no one, you can go to school and college and learn a thing.
Yeah.
But if you hadn't experienced it from the weight of what we did, right, to whereas we were, we didn't have nobody pull us away to help us steer us away from making early death decisions. No, we actually lived an early death because we didn't know we was going to get out.
Yeah.
We couldn't tell you, if they asked, man, when you getting out? Man, I ain't got no date. Right? So going back to what you're saying, Dante, is so powerful, man, because it helps us understand that, you know, having regret, right? We can articulate that when we went in front of some people, victims' rights groups and all that, and regret, and tell them what regret really means to us. Because you can't articulate regret, how you going to get the remorse?
You can't.
If you can't speak about what you regret, how can you actually say I have remorse for that act that I once did? So these pros and cons are so impactful that we can be able to share, right, in our experiences what we did. So now when we talk to the youth, or young men and women, or people of our age, or people of like mind, right, we can share about these are the actual things that we come to know and come to do through what? Through reading, education, you know what I mean? And we're allowing ourselves to grow. So that's what our organization and agency push. That's what we're about.
That's what we're about. And you know, we don't just, and it's more than just being able to read and talk about it. It's putting it in play, right? Pushing that play button. Because we can have a volume of CDs, even though we don't use them no more. We can have a long playlist, right? But if you ain't pushing that right button, and that information is not going to get where it's supposed to go, they don't mean nothing. I mean, we can have it all, right? And in order for us to get our lives back, right? And what I mean by getting our lives back, we had to go through a system, right? Through a parole system. What's gonna make you jump through all type of hoops to get your life back, right? So you had to articulate and understand what remorse was. You had to really break it down. What was your emotional state at the time of your crime? You know, why was you angry? When did that anger come from? Did that anger come for the night of the crime? Some people will say yes, but all actuality, no. The anger came way back then when we was kids. Whatever happened in our lives, right? The times we was being bullied. The times when we felt shameful.
You got to tell that story.
Right.
I can't let you get away with that. You got
Which
to tell
one?
that shameful story about you on the bus.
Where are we going there?
You got to. You got to, because, you know.
And, you know, he right. I told him before, I was in 1983, 84. I'm 13, 14 years old. I'm on the back of the bus. My mother bought me these shoes from Hilltop. Some nice shoes, right? But maybe I wore them a little too long. I don't know. I might have worn the shoes a little too long. Now, mind you, kid growing up, you on the AC Transit. I'm going to El Cerrito High School. If you don't want to be talked about, don't go to the back of the bus. You go to the back of the bus, you know what's going down, right? I hop myself to the back of the bus. Me and a friend of mine, Demetrius Trim, rest in peace, we're in the back of the bus. And it's a lot of 11th and 12th graders on the back of the bus. Yeah, I'm in the 9th grade. I'm sitting down, and I hear the girls, they just looking at each other. They start giggling, right? They giggling on top. I'm like, well, what's going on? I'm thinking, you know, I don't think the joke is on me. Next thing you know, I hear them whistle. They looking down at my shoes. I look at my shoes, right? The front of my toe turned up, right? Or the front of my shoe. I'm like, okay. Do I get off the bus and run? Or do I got to go all the way to the end of my stop, right? I stood on the back of the bus, and I took it, right? I took the humiliation. You know, hey, I felt bad. I was so shameful, right? That triggered me to tell myself, right? That's one of the times I was selling weed off and on, but I really pushed selling the weed back then, right? A little foul out of gold weed, right? And I told myself, never again will anyone ever be able to talk about my shoes and the thing without me feeling good about it, right? So meaning that if I had a bankroll in my pocket, they talk about, I can say I got a bankroll and I'm driving, but you on the bus, right? But we see that to this day, kids, right? Talk about kids. That's an aspect of bullying, right? Yeah. Talk about kids and would drive them to commit suicide. Yeah. Would drive them to do other things by them shameful acts. And I'm someone who went through it. They didn't talk about my dark skin color. I embraced Norman King, right? All that. And I had another incident. I'm at a house party, right? We all getting, and a friend of mine, he loved cracking jokes. And back then, we was going around and buying the players packages, right? I bought a players package, right? So I had one of the jewelry, with the chains on, right? He walk up to me and say, "Boy, you got some jewelry on?" And start down that, "Boy, you got some work on." So everybody who knows some work, that's a fake jewelry, right? Hey, climb in the party in front of everybody. But those 2 times I told myself, that'll never happen again, because those things, if you're not really mentally strong and know what you're dealing with, will really can drive you over the edge. And what it drove me over the edge. It pushed me deeper in a life of crime, criminal thinking, and going left. And it allowed me to make near and early death decisions. But I end up taking someone alive, 2 lives, what I deeply regret. And may God forgive me, rest their souls, and continue to allow us as men, as 100 years, to be able to serve the community and give back through our passion, to understand our calling, through our God-given talents, and through our sincere repentance.
And like Fahim just said about shame, shame can drive you to do certain things that that you shouldn't be doing. Just like selling weed, pushing dope, pimping, or whatever it may be, right? And if you shame about something, talk to somebody. Just like I was shamed to go embarrassed when I was reading, and they laughing at me, who can't read. That was a shameful moment in my life. So guess what? Science, never went to science no more after that, because Dante, they might actually read again. So that led me to cut school. To cut school, I ain't gonna say cut school, but to cut science. So it's very important to talk to somebody. If you're going through something, talk to somebody. Understand shame, understand regret, understand remorse, understand guilt, understand yourself. Because, like you said before, if we don't understand self, then guess what? It's a lot of things that we're not going to understand. You're not going to understand your negative behavior or the impact it had on family members, the community, as well as your family, as well as yourself. So that's why it's very important to understand remorse. Because if you don't have no remorse, how can you be sympathized or sympathy for your victims or for their family?
Okay.
You can't. And it took me a long time to come to that, to come to that. And I came to it. You know, when I reached out to one of my one of the victims' family members in my case, we made a connection. You know, it's beautiful because something that I wanted to do once I understood my wrong, once I understood what remorse was about, what I understood what guilt and shame was about, because I didn't know. I didn't have any understanding of that.
Right.
So once you can understand that, it's a possibility that you won't make early death decisions. It's a possibility that you will understand the consequences. You will understand your actions or your act.
Exactly. I gotta say something, Patrick. Before we close out, you ain't getting away with the jacket.
Well, yeah, we're gonna close out with that, but we're gonna say this. I'll say this much. It was really about my prom, right? With the age jacket on, right? Yeah, you know, and I communicate, you know, with the young lady off and on. Very good friend of mine, but I won't mention her name. But yeah, I faked on her prom. Well, I wouldn't say faked on her prom. My mama didn't buy me a tux, so I couldn't go to her prom, and I hid in my bedroom. And the young lady came all the way to my house with the limousine and her friends in her prom dress, and knocked on my door. And my mama let them in. And I told my mama, don't tell her I'm in the bedroom. My mama did the opposite, and told the woman, you know, hey, I'm in the bedroom. She come knocking on the door. My mama made me open it because, you know, mama is the ruler, runs everything. I had to open the door. When I opened my bedroom door, she stood there with the Cinderella dress on. I had an A starter on with 501s with some Adidas on. I'll never forget that. And I felt so shameful. I've never been so embarrassed in my life. And with that, you know, I told myself, and I was living in Richmond, by the way, right on 21st and Cutting. That's where she came. And I told her myself, first I was mad at my mama. I told my mama, you embarrassed me. You know what I mean? I've never felt so embarrassed in my life. And that from there, I packed my bags. I watched Brady Bunch, and I watched when Peter packed his bags and left. And I looked at my mama, and I told her I'm leaving. And I packed my bags, and I left, and I went with my auntie house in Norfolk, Bushrod Park 5-9. And I became a part of that gang. I was already close to them, but I became a part of that. And that stirred me. That made me go into a full thing, because I told myself I'd never be broke again. I'd never feel that sense of shame again. And I didn't have nobody to talk me out of what I was getting ready to do, you know what I mean, by committing all kinds of acts of violence, right? And ended up serving a long stint in prison, right? So that's why, you know, breaking that cycle of violence, I came out and I'm a part of 100 years, and that's why I do what I do, because I understand that shame has weight. It can make you go do things that you would never think you would do, right? And so, you know, closing, I just say this, man. It's important that the message is clear and that the youth is protected and they can be given a chance by helping them steer them away from early death decision and help them break the cycle of violence. And as again, 100 Years Enterprise, that's what we do, that's what we're about. We help steer youth away from early death decision, as well as mentorship and also one-on-one consultation. So with that being said, thank you for your time. 100 Years, you can catch us at 100years.biz, our website, 100 Years DLP, which is our Instagram account, and 100 Years Enterprise, which is our YouTube.
Absolutely.
Contact us all those places as well. Give a sub, reach out, buy our hats, shirts, and subscribe to everything that we do.
Subscribe, like, and share.
And yeah, thank you for your time.
Exactly. We are 100 Years Enterprise. And I will just make this last little comment. Parents, do not be ashamed to ask your kids questions. If you don't know, 100years.biz is where you'll find your answer. You better know it.
Peace.